Hey everyone, welcome to Wargaming Parrot. I'm David and today I'm going to be talking about housing two birds together. I've got Pickles and Scampi out and about because, as you know, we recently housed them together and they're getting on really good. So in this video I'm going to be covering some tips on how to prepare your birds to be housed together, some sort of pitfalls to avoid, sort of the things we learned from our experiences of preparing Pickles and Scampi, and then when we got them in together, some of the things we encountered, so it can help you when you're trying to do the same. So before you try to attempt to house two birds together, especially if they are rescues or they haven't really interacted much, there's a lot of work you need to do. That is bonding the two birds. I have a video on that. I'll leave a card for that now, but please do work on bonding before you try and just put two birds together in the same cage, because it will make it a lot easier, a lot less stressful for them, and it will reduce the chances, yes Scampi, reduce the chances of anything sort of untoward happening, them fighting or one getting injured. So please do watch that video first before you attempt to do anything. So the first point I'd like to make is when you're trying to house two birds together, don't rush it, don't just dump them in, because some birds may adapt very quickly and be quite happy together, especially if they're the same species. Other birds may not adapt, may take a lot longer, or may never want to be housed together. So you need to be very careful about how you approach it. Take your time, make sure you do it properly, because it gives you the best chance of success. I also want to mention as well, you can potentially house different species together. For example, a cockatiel and a conure, but it is more complex. There are more difficulties involved, and I feel that a lot more work needs to be put in so you're safe and happy that they're going to be okay. So something well worth doing when you're going through this process is planning for the worst. That means planning for it not to work out. That means keeping their old cages around, or at least one of them, and making sure you're prepared if they don't get on, if there is fighting, if there is any problems, because that way all you have to do is just set up the other cage, pop one of the birds in there, and the problem's solved, and you're not left with this sort of panic situation where you've got a cage, they're constantly fighting, you have nowhere for them to go. If possible, try and do short trial runs of them being in the same cage together. We did this with Scampi and Pickles in the boys' cage. We were fortunate in that we did have the boys' cage available, which was exactly the same as what we went to buy for them. And due to this, it made it a lot easier for them, because we could put them in the cage when the boys are out, see how they interacted, and see if all that bonding work we did with them would pay off. Obviously for you it may not be as easy. However, if you were to purchase the next cage, the bigger one, you want as big as possible as well, because obviously the more space they have, the more chance they have of not fighting and getting in squabbles. So if you can do a trial run with the birds together in the cage, that's awesome. Just don't do separate trial runs, because that can lead to sort of maybe potentially territorial behaviour. They'll consider that territory their cage. So make sure that they have equal time in that cage and you do trial runs together. This is another one of those points you can sort of take on before you pop them in together. Pickles nicely cuddling while Scampi plays. You can encourage play in and around the cage. So I'm going to assume that you have a sort of trial run cage, or you have your fresh cage set up. You can just encourage them to play in and around it. You don't want to put them in there yet, but you can just have them playing on top for treats, positively reinforcing it, because that obviously leads to a positive association with the cage, and then having them being rewarded on the cage for being calm together as well. So I'm going to assume now you've done all your bonding work, you've done all your trial runs, so you want to be thinking about how you're going to set it up and give them the best chance for success. My first tip may seem like a bit of an obvious one, but it is to provide multiple food and water bowls. If your birds are getting on well, they may still fight over food and water resources. It's important to have 2 food and 2 water bowls, or if you're really pushing your luck and having loads of multiple birds, which you kind of need an aviary for, basically 1 food and 1 water bowl per bird. So I briefly mentioned territory and providing equal time for the birds in the cage. This point is kind of related to that. What you want to provide is lots of different perches. You want to provide lots of perches for them. I'll actually pan around our conures cage in a moment to show you what we've done. But I'll provide lots of perches to give them options where to sleep. So if one of them wants to sleep in one place, there's an option for the other one, and there's places for them to sort of just have their own space really. Because like us, if we're cooped up in an area, you want to have the maximum amount of space possible and lots of fun things to do. This also relates to cage size. Again, I want to reiterate this, have the biggest cage size possible, because the smaller the cage size, the more likely that your birds are to fight. Just going to pan around the conures cage a little bit. I've got a conure cage setup video, which I'll leave a card for now if you want a little bit more information. But if you look, so first of all, we have 2 food and water dishes on opposite ends. We have multiple options high up for perches, This was to give them the best chance of bonding and having their own space. So Chips wants to say something about it now, but for example, if Scampy went to perch on one side high up and Pickles on the other, they wouldn't be conflicting, although they just started cuddling, which was cute. Lots and lots of toys everywhere and lots of options for them to reduce the chance of fighting. Next point I'd like to make is provide lots of toys. If your birds are anything like our conures, they like to play, they like to chew, so you have lots of toy options in there. It's going to reduce the chance of any squabbling or fighting. We're quite lucky with Scampy and Pickles. They do squabble a little bit and fight, which is perfectly normal, and it's not anything to be worried about if they do. But providing those extra toys and having them be able to play in different areas will mean they won't sort of like get jealous of each other and start fighting, and it will sort of increase your chance of success. Next point is observe, observe, observe. If you pop them in the cage, you want to be keeping a very close eye on them and watching what they're doing. And so I said, Pickles and Scampy get on very well. They have squabbles and fight a little bit. But when I'm talking about fighting, we're not talking about going for each other, biting each other, drawing blood, that sort of thing. That sort of thing is definitely something you want to avoid. We're talking about sort of mini squabbles where they're beak bashing, or one of them chases one off their favourite toy. That sort of thing is okay and normal, although you need to observe and make sure that it's not happening too often, so one bird isn't getting bullied and the other bird isn't being a bully. So please do observe, 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 watch how they're getting on and see if you need to make any adjustments, any changes, and potentially if you do need to remove them from that environment. So next point I want to make is the first night is going to be the most difficult. You're basically double whammying your birds. Even with all the sort of like prep work we did for Pickles and Scampy, they were still very nervous and very worried. Because obviously they haven't been housed together before. That's a bit nervous. It's like when you get a new roommate, that's a bit scary. And also it's a new cage, so that's also scary. So you need to be prepared for some difficulties in that first night. Maybe have a night light on next to them so it's not so scary. Keep calming them, rewarding them, and just generally keeping on your toes, and also being prepared that it is going to be difficult and that you can get through it. This isn't necessarily unique to these guys, but it can happen in all sorts of situations. So for us, when we housed these guys together, during the day, they were pretty content. They were used to it because they'd had their trial runs. However, overnight, they were calling for us. They were sort of like scrabbling. They were very, very nervous because of that new environment. And we sort of left the night light on. We came in and we kept reassuring them. And then eventually, once it was sort of then all bedtime, we left the room, we let them scrabble a little bit, and they eventually settled down and started cuddling. This may not happen for you, it may take longer, it depends on the individual birds, but do be aware it's going to be a difficult one that first night. So my next point is don't be afraid to make changes if you need to. That means rearranging the cage to make sure that both birds have somewhere comfortable to sleep, making sure the food bowls and water bowls are accessible, removing the birds and putting them back in their old cages if it isn't working out. Don't be afraid to make changes. As I said in the previous point though, give it a little bit of time, but if there's any sort of extreme reactions or fighting, you need to be prepared to step in and deal with them. Another thing you can do, which I've kind of mentioned before, is you can reward for calm interactions. So if your birds are calm in the cage together or calm and around in the cage together, make sure you reward with their favourite treat. I've got a video on treat hierarchy which would be worth popping in now, so I'll leave a card for that. But always reward for those calm interactions, because then they'll be like, okay, if I'm calm, if I'm relaxed, I'm going to get a reward. Our two birds are very calm now, they're just cuddling on my shoulder. But yes, always reward for calm interactions. My next point is keep the routine if possible. So have the same bedtime, have the same training schedule, have them out at the same time, because parrots really do like routine and it really does help them with all sorts of things. So make sure you keep your routine. Also make sure when you're putting them in a cage, you're available when you're around. You don't want to sort of pop them in a cage and then just go, because it's going to be very scary for them. The other thing I want to say is if you can put them in a cage in the morning, it gives them the whole day to get settled in there and increases your chances of success. So guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you have any tips on caging two birds together, do please feel free to leave them down below. In the meantime, from me, Pickles and Scampy, take care and have a great day.